Hello, folks. Yes, use my provostial voice. I'm Don Paul. I'm the Provost and Executive Vice President of Academic Affairs here at wonderful Binghamton University, and it is my incredible honor and privilege to launch this keynote address tonight and award ceremony. So thank you all for coming. The annual Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize, now in its second year, remembers our dear friend and colleague, I-GMAP founding co-director and professor of public administration, Nadia Rubaii, who unfortunately passed several years ago. The prize recognizes a figure in the broad global community of atrocity prevention, whose courage, compassion, and curiosity embody Nadia's values and spirit, which were foundational for I-GMAP, the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention. Last year, some of you may have been here, the inaugural prize winner was the courageous Filipino journalist and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Ressa, who gave a just incredible address last year. She is a past Nobel Prize winner, we may have tonight a feature about President. We don't know, but we're optimistic. So the 2024, and I'm not going to give the award, but the 2024 Rubaii Memorial Prize recognizes Ugandan LGBTQ advocate and human rights defender Frank Mugisha, whose tireless work to protect and defend Ugandan LGBTQ plus the community in Uganda at great personal risk has made a real difference, not just in his native Uganda, but internationally as well. And as someone myself who is not only gay, but also lived in Africa before, I know how hard this work is, but how important and incredibly impactful it is. So a few thanks and acknowledgements. Frank, of course, for coming so far to be with us today. Nadia's mother, Sandra Pollack, her father, Nadia Rubaii, and his partner, Marcia Powell, and though he's not here at the moment, Charles Scheidt, who has been incredibly generous in his support of I-GMAP, and whose work we thank and whose support we thank. So with that being said, it's going to be a great event, and I'll turn this over to Max and Carrie, the two co-directors of I-GMAP.
Who's joined us, who's come from the Frontiers of Prevention Conference downtown, and has joined us here on campus. You're very welcome. We're delighted to have you here. My name is Max Pensky, and together with Professor Carrie Wiggum, I'm one of the two co-directors of the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention. On behalf of all of us here at I-GMAP and Binghamton University, it's my distinct honor to welcome Frank Mugisha as this year's recipient of the Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize. Just over 2 years ago, we lost our dear friend and colleague, Nadia Rubaii. She spent her life as an academic and a practitioner working to build a more inclusive, compassionate, and just world where the rights of all people are respected and the wonderful diversity of humanity is celebrated. We created the Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize in her honor and memory to honor individuals who share Nadia's vision and dedicate their lives to making it a reality. And we have Nadia loved hummingbirds. So we have hummingbird remarks here for this year as well. As Provost Hall has said, Frank Mugisha's decades-long work defending and protecting LGBTQ plus people in Uganda is a remarkable story of commitment and courage. Most of you here are probably aware of the long history of homophobic persecution that Ugandans face, and the outsized leading role that the Ugandan state has played in that persecution. This state-led persecution reached a new low this past year, when longtime Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni signed the Anti-Homosexuality Act, as it's titled, into law. It is by far one of the most punitive and discriminatory pieces of anti-gay legislation in the world. The legislation makes any same-sex relationship punishable by life imprisonment, and in cases of what they call aggravated homosexuality, by the death penalty. Despite a global outcry, the law was upheld by Uganda's constitutional court last week. Frank Mugisha was one of the chief petitioners appealing that law to the Ugandan Supreme Court. And speaking after the decision with the New York Times, Frank mourned the court's ruling, pointing out correctly that the Anti-Homosexuality Act violates Uganda's constitutional guarantees of non-discrimination to its own citizens, as well as its international obligations under human rights law. Moreover, it further worsens ongoing lethal violence against LGBTQ plus Ugandans, including unlawful detention, beating, torture, and disappearance.
It comes as no surprise that Frank is at the forefront, a very physically dangerous place of organized opposition to the Anti-Homosexuality Act. For years, he's been among the most visible persistent, and dedicated defenders of human rights in his country. In 2011, a national newspaper published the names of 100 gay and lesbian activists, including David Kato, one of the founders of Sexual Minorities Uganda and Frank's close friend. Kato was murdered in his home. After his death, Frank took over as executive director of SMUG, a post he still holds, and ever since has worked tirelessly to bring international attention to Uganda's ever-increasing persecution of its citizens. He has withstood intimidation, arrest, and countless threats, making sure that his organization survives and that LGBTQ plus Ugandans know that they are seen, valued, and defended. I-GMAP is certainly not the first organization to recognize Frank's extraordinary courage and the value of his work. He has been honored with the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award and the Sorrel Feralto Memorial Prize. He was a 2014 nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize. By adding to this already impressive list of formal recognitions, we want not only to honor Frank and to thank him for his work, we also want to add to his international visibility, making it that much harder for his own government to act with impunity, as it targets him and all other LGBTQ plus Ugandans with violent persecution for living their lives as who they truly are. So on behalf of the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention, Binghamton University, and the State University of New York, we are deeply proud to award Mr. Frank Mugisha with the 2024 Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I appreciate the very nice introduction. I'm truly humbled and honored to be here this evening, but also humbled to be receiving the Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize. The work of Professor Nadia resonates, and the legacy resonates exactly with what I am trying to achieve and stop in my country, and so many activists are doing the same. So for me to be receiving this praise in Nadia's name, it's a true honor for me. I'm very, very glad to be here this evening, and I appreciate the support. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Kerry, for getting me over to the US and making sure that I'm here in person. All the organizers, I-GMAP, thank you very much. The person who received the prize before, who is actually working with me at this point in a fellowship, I appreciate that. I'm going to look at a presentation today that gives you a bit of a background of what's happening in Uganda. And it's such an honor for me to be speaking here today and receiving the praise, but also speak about LGBT human rights. And thank you again, I-GMAP, for making sure that you bring to the attention LGBT human rights that are under attack at this point. My organization is called Sexual Minorities Uganda, and our major work, we bring together LGBTQ organizations in providing support to the community, but also making sure that we do advocacy and visibility within the country. Unfortunately, and as I will go on with my presentation, in August 2022, the government shut us down. I want to start with the question, is homosexuality African or not African? And as I go along with my presentation, I think we will answer that question together. Many times when I talk about homosexuality in my own country, people say that is Western. You try to promote Western ideology, something non-African. At the moment we have, out of 55 countries in Africa that are decriminalizing homosexuality. It varies in different contexts. In some countries, like for example, Rwanda, homosexuality has never been criminalized. In some countries, LGBTQ persons are frowned upon. In some countries like Uganda, Ghana, Kenya, they're trying, either have brought up further legislations. The views are diverse in most of Africa. Some are extreme, some aren't. Many have argued that there is no homosexuality in Africa. And when I am doing my advocacy in Uganda, I simply give Ugandans an example of, in every language in Uganda, there's a word that refers to homosexuality. And this language was never introduced to any Western person. This language is our native language. So the question I ask is, if the word homosexuality is in every language, why do you have to name something that doesn't exist? And I quote some history. In my own country, one of the biggest kingdoms, there was in history that one of the king was bisexual. There was acceptance within Africa of LGBTQ persons, and laws were saying LGBTQ persons. In my country, the Central Kingdom, the firstborn woman is referred to as Sir. So right now, if a woman says I'm Sir, then that's bad. But in our own culture, that's how it is. So acceptance existed in Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana. And now we're seeing all that being erased. There has been some progress in some countries. South Africa is one of the countries that has the best protection for LGBTQ persons. But until to this day, we still have transgender persons being attacked on the streets, lesbian women being sexually assaulted and abused, harassment and violation is still happening. She saw the same thing. They thought of Angola, Mozambique. We're seeing progress there. But the protection of LGBTQ persons on the ground, the acceptance is not there. So I'll zero down on Uganda for my presentation today. I want to give you a context on Africa. So Uganda is a country that is located in East Africa, and it is a landlocked country, neighboring Kenya, Tanzania, Southern Sudan, DRC Congo. It is a country that many people love who have been there, because it's very friendly, and we're well known for three things. Before it has been two things. One, when I'm in a taxi and I say I'm from Uganda, then you know Idi Amin. Now they also ask me, are you for trying to kill gay people? And I say, well, I'm the activist. And they're like, well, are you going back? Are you sure you're safe? Will you make how do you go to the airport? So honestly, it is international recognition like this that makes sure I go back, that makes sure I am safe. That's how I have the protection. That's how I am able to do the advocacy I'm doing because of international recognition. And the country is also known for the gorillas. We have people go to see gorillas. Unfortunately, the country that I love and I call home criminalizes the LGBT community to the extent of introducing a death penalty. Homosexuality in Uganda was first criminalized in the 1950s by the British, who introduced the sodomy laws that are famously known around the world as the sodomy laws. And not only in Uganda, but in many of the British colonies, these laws were there, including India. Same-sex, sex and same-sex, sex in general is established in Africa. If I go to my grandmother and start talking about sex, your front on me. Just, no, that's not your aim, that's not your role. It is reserved for a certain setting. And so when you talk about same sex, then that's a taboo. So it becomes very difficult to start addressing issues around sex and sexuality and African sex. And we all grew up knowing that. I know that at any single point, have we gone out and advocated for anything outside the context of the planet? Advocates simply want to live in peace, like any other planet. There was rejection, societal approval. I came out at the age of 14. I wasn't worried of being arrested. I wasn't worried of being beaten. I was only worried of losing my friends. I was only worried of being called names, and indeed, I would walk in the classroom and if anyone written homo said my name. That was the biggest worry. A few suspensions from school, but I wasn't worried I'm going to be beaten, arrested, or anyone is going to say I've been taught how to be gay. And I've since gained family acceptance because I came out at an early age before there was all this propaganda around the LGBT issues. So the reason I distinguish the picture I have here, my president is President Museveni, President of Uganda, that is the first time that the president of Uganda mentions homosexuality. He was traveling abroad because Uganda had gained a lot of progress on fighting HIV and AIDS. And so he was asked, you're doing very good work on HIV and AIDS. How about the LGBT community? He said, we don't have those ones in Uganda, they don't exist. When he came back to Uganda, he found out actually there are activists talking about homosexuality. He said, lock them up and shoot them. And also distinguish the statements that they put in my PowerPoint that say the complexity is how acceptance and tolerance for LGBTQ persons becomes the barometer by which the rate and capacity for national sovereignty is elevated. Many people say that when Western partners speak up, then you're speaking down on the African leaders. But that is the only time authoritarian governments respond when Western partners talk about human rights. But every time they're buying guns and taking big loans, they're friends and partners. They fly to all these capitals and lobby for money. But when the partners tell you, okay, with our values, because this money is coming from our taxpayers are also LGBTQ persons. We have an obligation, if you're criminalizing LGBT persons in your country, our own taxpayers are going to hold us accountable. Then our leaders will say, no, don't talk to us about human rights. Uganda is also a sovereign country, you can't tell us what to do. And so we move on. Now, what we are saying now? Why are we seeing a growing homophobia and transphobia in the country? Like I said, when I was growing up, LGBTQ persons were frowned upon. There was fear, but there was no arrest. I grew up knowing people who were rumored or perceived to be LGBTQ persons. They were not reported to local councils. They were never arrested. But the growing homophobia and transphobia that we're seeing now is language that was not in the Ugandan society, nor the African society. We have our own society of Ubuntu, which means togetherness, where people don't report on each other. But that is being distorted now by radicalizing and weaponizing Ugandans against a very small marginalized group. And the reason we're seeing that is because the anti-gay and anti-gender movement is growing in the country, equating LGBTQ persons to pedophiles. I'm being charged right now in my country of recruiting people into homosexuality. For a country that has history of military rule, when you talk about recruitment, it resonates with some sort of military camp where you're taking people to join something, join a force. So it feels like I am getting all the men, the young men, and putting them in a force somewhere where then they have to come and take over something. And that's exactly what the anti-gay and anti-race movements are saying in Uganda, that I'm trying to turn every Ugandan into a homosexual person and undermine the cultural values. I come from a country that's about 75% under the age of 35. 16% under the age, 50% under the age of 16. If you talk about children, everyone's going to get. Everyone's going to be aggressive because every person has a child in their life. So they use children so that they can create a lot more fear in the country. And that's what the fear does. It weaponizes the media. Because now what the media is doing is outing people, naming and shaming LGBTQ persons, using bizarre headlines. And as Kerry mentioned in the introduction, my colleague was murdered after appearing on one of the newspapers that said, "Handed, they are after our children." He was killed from his home. So whenever there are media demonstrations that you see, whenever there are media hate messages in the media, then people demonstrate against that. We see hate crimes increasing towards the LGBT community. Prior to my organization being shut down, I was verified. 2 of my colleagues were arrested, but all the propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation was on social media, on TikTok, WhatsApp groups. They called me all sorts of names. People with large platforms hosted influencers who were saying, "I go to schools and recruit children." And I asked my government, is your security agencies, are they so amateur that they can't arrest me if I'm going to every school and recruiting everyone? Am I like invisible? Like, how do I do that? But my organization was shut down, my colleagues were arrested. For the first time, I almost fled the country because I was cornered. Mentally, I was not okay. Because I was scared of everything. I was feeling death threats. I had to turn off my phone. I had to stay in a safe house, undisclosed location where because of the threats I was receiving. And then because of this propaganda and radicalizing of Ugandans, Parliament introduced an anti-gay legislation. And in 2023 May, it was signed by the President into law. When the law was introduced in our parliament, the members of the parliament were calling for the death penalty. One member of parliament said, LGBTQ persons should be castrated. And another person said, if my child is gay, I'll take up the job of hanging LGBTQ persons. And one member of parliament was asked why death penalty, the wages of sin, is death. This law, like I mentioned, unfortunately duplicates an already existing law that punishes homosexuality. This law would punish someone up to death. I quote some of the provisions. Third, mandatory reporting of any person who is known as LGBTQ person, to outlaw housing for any LGBTQ person, to punish me for simply speaking out for being gay, 20 years in prison. This law was brought by the anti-gay groups saying they want to protect children. Ironically, this law would punish anyone under the age of 18, 3 years in prison. When I was a child, when I came out, I was worried about losing friends, getting suspended from school, being called names. But under this law, I was put to prison for 3 years. We went to court to challenge the legislation, and unfortunately, just last week, our Constitutional Court upheld the legislation. We are going back next week on Monday to the Supreme Court to continue challenging the legislation. The impact, as you can imagine, mental health, trauma, cases of suicide, We have LGBTQ persons fleeing the country. Right now, there are over 400 LGBTQ persons in Kenya, in Kakuma County, Nairobi, from Uganda. Arrests, we have 7 cases under prosecution, including 1 at death penalty, violations of people who are being beaten, evictions of people who are being evicted from their homes. And unfortunately, every time the police arrests an LGBTQ person, they parade it before the media and they force people to do annual examinations, which are degrading and inhuman. This year in January, a friend of mine was stabbed to near death because of this legislation. He has since fled the country and moved to Canada. Last year alone, in September, we published a report that documented over 180 cases of people being evicted from their homes, 170 cases of torture, 220 cases of trauma. We documented cases of stigma and discrimination when accessing services. So it's not only about the anti-gay legislation. Like I said, there is growing anti-gay, anti-gender, and anti-trans movements. There are other legislation being introduced in my parliament: sexual offenses, anti-pornography law, computer misuse act. If I'm not charged under the anti-gay law, I will be charged for posting something on my social media. The Human Assisted Reproductive Health Technology Bill. This legislation would outlaw any woman from accessing IVF if they are not married. It would outlaw a married couple from getting a surrogate if one of them does not produce a doctor's letter that they have a fertility problem. Up to this day, we don't have a comprehensive sexuality education curriculum because they are saying this curriculum is going to teach young people how to have sex and promote homosexuality. And so the conservative religious groups have made sure young people are not told about sex education. These are some of the media from some of the legislation that we're talking about. So I'll briefly talk about the anti-gay and anti-gender rights movement as I conclude my talk this evening. There's too much funding coming in to support the anti-gay and anti-gender movement. ILGA, which is the largest LGBTQ international organization, documented that the anti-gay movement has spent about $39 million. The LGBTQ movement has spent about $19 million. So they have more money, more funding. They use misinformation and disinformation. They call LGBTQ persons pedophiles. They use language around protection of children that every person is going to care about. They promote conversion therapy. I have a picture of one of the American Christian evangelical, Sharon Slater, from Family Watch International, who was in Uganda in March 2023 at a conference that brought together members of parliament from Africa. And that conference came up with a communique asking all African countries to come up with a similar legislation. But after that meeting with the president of Uganda, the president mentioned that she was trying to convince him to start a conversion therapy facility in Uganda, saying that even the international community will come to this facility because many gay and transgender persons have been lured into that and they want to change, but they can't change. They can't do that in Uganda. Open democracy has exposed some of these extreme American evangelicals. So if you read about it, you will see a lot of that from their website. Scott Lively is one of the American evangelical that first came to Uganda in 2002. And ideally, that is how we found out that there is homophobia and hatred being exported to Uganda. And so we decided to find out more information. And in 2012, my organization, Sexual Minorities Uganda, sued Scott Lively here in the US, in Massachusetts, for not what he said, for what he did. His involvement in working and supporting the Killed Against Bill in Uganda. And for the first time, the judge in Massachusetts said prosecution of LGBTQ persons could amount to crimes against humanity. Our case went on for several years and was only dismissed on grounds that the court did not have the jurisdiction to convict him because the atrocities were committed in Uganda and not on US soil. And I wanted to distinguish these two expert reports that were done because it resonates with the work of the university here. The two expert reports that we had in the case of sexual minorities versus Scott Lively, Dr. Jennifer Lanning, in one of the expert reports, says that mass atrocities are always preceded by other warning signs of genocide. And for the case of what is happening in Uganda, systematically, and the lived experience, what we are living every day, could amount to other warning signs of genocide. Another leading experts mentioned that in the expert report, again, what the judge said later on said, persecution based on sexual orientation could as well amount to crimes against humanity and international law. So for us, it was very important to bring up this case. But our achievement from this case was also that we exposed the exploitation of hatred. So my talk was centered around that, but also the ripple effects of what is happening in other countries. We are seeing Congo, Kenya, Ghana, just their parliament passed a similar legislation. So the ripple effect is happening in Africa. And once this gains momentum, it becomes very difficult because, unfortunately, people are beginning to believe what these anti-gay groups are saying. Some of the work we've done to challenge and fight back. One is definitely working with civil society partners, working with the international community. The US government has been very helpful in responding to this anti-gay legislation by imposing visa sanctions on some of the people who have been violating the human rights of LGBTQ persons, but even other human rights. They have issued travel advisory to the LGBT community here and other businesses. Many countries around the world have issued statements of sympathy and support. There have been solidarity groups. There have been demonstrations outside our missions and embassies all around the world. Civil society has come together to work with us in responding to this legislation. The World Bank has held a loan that was supposed to come to Uganda, saying that it will be very difficult for Uganda to implement this law if Uganda is not inclusive and diverse. International solidarity has been progressive, and like I mentioned in the past, international solidarity has been good that it provides the LGBTQ community with a blanket security cover. That statement is very important for me. Again, it answers the question I started with. It is homophobia and not homosexuality that is foreign to Africa. And I think it's very important for us to look at homophobia and transphobia as a global issue and not only an African problem. Don't take for granted the rights you have as the LGBT community in the United States. Because once the anti-gay movement and anti-AIDS movement gains momentum in Africa, they will come back and erase all the gains we've made. What can you do? Research is very important. I'm very glad that I'm speaking at the university today. Solidarity, global solidarity is very important. Funding and supporting activists on the ground, ending inequalities, looking at this as a global issue, but most importantly, looking at this as a cross-cutting issue. Thank you very much. I'm deeply honored to be here and accept this praise. Thank you very much.
So we have some time to take some questions from the audience. Great, so Sandy, we don't have a microphone to pass around, so I know you won't have a problem with this, Sandy, but if you just...
I have a question. I really appreciate all the incredible good information that you shared. But I wonder if you could share a little bit more on how you see the homophobic laws in Uganda being applied to gay men as how they are being applied to lesbians. If there is any difference, because as I read some of the things, the focus seems to be against gay men.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. The societal disapproval is majorly around gay men, because the disapproval is really mostly around sexual practice. And many times, when I walk in a room in Uganda and I'm talking to people, I put a disclaimer: I'm not really interested in anybody in this room. Because you want everyone. And then number two, I have people look at me in a very derogatory, degrading way, because the assumption, the sexualizing, the assumption that I'm from having sex, and in most cases, I'm being submissive. And so that aggression of an African man being submissive, some people don't like it. They're like, you can't be an African man and act like a woman, because women are seen as being inferior. So when the laws are being made, they target mostly gay men than the women. But what we're seeing now, which is again new, is that they are trying to craft the legislation in a way that they target a broad spectrum. Gay men, lesbian women, and mostly the trans community. Yeah.
Thank you for all your work. I wonder if you can comment on the court's decision, and lo and behold, on page 104 of the decision was a paragraph citing Dobbs. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that and maybe share some of your thoughts about that.
Thank you. In fact, I should have had that in my presentation. It's very, as you mentioned, when we went to challenge the law, we had 14 grounds on which we were challenging the law, and most of them were within our constitution and also looking at the international law, how this law undermines our constitution and international law. And so when they were getting the ruling, our judges, they said Roe v. Wade, which is a decision in the US. And that should be a clear example to show you that this decision was heavily informed by the anti-gay and anti-race groups. If you look at the preamble of the legislation itself, it is a language from all the small bills that are being passed in the US. All the small bills that are being passed in the US. They just make them more extreme in Uganda.
This kind of ties back to the first question that was asked, but in terms of differences between gay men and gay women and trans people, like being treated like in different ways. So legally, from what I understood, like the treatment is more comprehensive, and legally, being a gay man versus gay woman versus trans person is similar, I think. But then, like in terms of legal treatment, like you said that like there were like when gay men are prosecuted as like an anal examination, would the same thing be performed for women, for trans people? Like how does it like work in a more reasonable way?
Yes. So anal examinations mostly happen to gay men and trans women. For lesbian women, it doesn't happen. What you see mostly in sexual, when we talk about sexual assault to lesbian women, is usually mostly corrective rape, and that has been majorly by family members. We have had some cases when lesbian women are in police custody, very few, but most of the cases we have of corrective rape are from family members. The anal examinations, usually it is gay men. And I'll give you an example. The police will come and arrest people in a workshop, take them in police custody, and all the men will be subjected to anal exams. Prove if there was sex, but you phoned for in a workshop. You know, you didn't find the people in a room or anywhere. So if you are arrested for any allegation around homosexuality in Uganda and identify as male, or the police imagines you identify as male, they will subject you to forced anal examination.
Thank you so much for that lecture. It was extraordinarily powerful. We're meeting here at I-GMAP, and it's about the prevention of mass atrocity crimes, and I'm wondering what solidarity and support you have felt and received from our community of practice, and what more we could do more effectively to sort of support you, but also that wider wall in that ripple. And if you sort of see things that could be done differently to support your efforts.
Thank you very much. I-GMAP is very important for my work. First of all, I'm learning more that we do a lot of work in preventing mass atrocities. And like I mentioned in my presentation briefly, what is happening in Uganda would amount that. That is how most of the genocides have happened. We are looking at a community, and we're looking at a community that is being erased. We're looking at, with the propaganda going on in Uganda, having politicians and people with power going on national media, mainstream media, and social media platforms, and calling for the killing and erasing of LGBTQ persons. Having our own society turning against us. As you see the cases I mentioned, it is mostly non-state actors taking the law into their hands. So looking at a community that is being erased, what I-GMAP could do is support us with that research that looks at this community and makes the case that indeed this could lead to genocide. We are also trying to hold more US, American conservative evangelicals accountable, and I think for us, using any kind of data, research, and information that helps us to do that, to make a case is very important. But also identifying other different jurisdictions that we can use, even if it's the UN or the ICJ, that is very important for us to make sure that there is accountability. And as I mentioned, the religious groups, both local and international, have so much impunity. So hold them accountable in our own country is not enough. Because, I mean, many members of the judiciary were laughing at our judges for the judgment we just received. It was terrible. Even people who do not know the law very well were saying, how does the judge say that we are not going to accept LGBTQ persons to associate because it is against the interest of the public? It's not anywhere in the law. So we need a lot of support in identifying any loopholes we can use. At some point, I had my colleagues arrested and detained. We did not know where they were for about 72 hours. And on the fourth day, they had been severely tortured, about 40 of them. So we wrote the UN working group on arbitrary detention. And we were able to give them the evidence. And so they went back to my country. And for the first time ever, Uganda replied, but of course denying everything. So we want any loopholes, any international instruments we can use to keep bringing this on the map and exposing what is happening in Uganda.
Yeah, thank you very much for your important work. My question is about the prospects for change within Uganda, and specifically regarding the Museveni regime, right? He's quite old now. Do you think there's any prospect that, let's say, if his son actually takes over, he might backtrack, he might change course? Or do you think it's going to continue?
I'm only optimistic that if the current president, President Museveni, is not president anymore, there will be a change. Because I believe the next president will somewhere want to get the support of the international community. And for Uganda, when you talk about human rights in the international community, number one on the agenda is LGBTQ human rights. So that's why I have hope. And then there may be something. I'm not very trusting of the son because he does not have a history of progressive human rights. But my only trust is that any new government that comes in, if they want to engage with the international community, they will definitely have to have some protection for LGBTQ human rights.
First of all, thank you so much for a wonderful and very informative presentation. I wonder, from our position, perhaps as a UK-based or global North-based charity, you mentioned that something that might be supportive is different forms of global solidarity. And for a minute, just turning maybe the lens on those actors that you'd expect solidarity from. I'm curious, what are some of the blockages that you've experienced in working with whether state or non-state actors in terms of asking for support? Because I think from our various positions working in different places, I'm curious about where the blockages have been. And,
That's a very nice question. It takes so much and many hours of flying to get international support. There's so much happening in the world at this point, unfortunately. So politicians who are supposed to ignite or start the conversation, they have priorities. And sometimes those priorities take center stage. So it takes a lot of lobbying, a lot of advocacy, a lot of meetings to get one small thing from any business for governments. And it takes the interest of getting people interested and understanding what is happening. So what we've done for Uganda is that we have made sure that our plight is amplified in the international media. So that helps to get the ordinary people giving us solidarity. And then constantly, I am back and forth in capitals all the time. I think some capitals that I've seen, reminding them and giving them evidence of what is happening in Uganda. And what we do, we work with local partners. Without local partners, we will not get much. Because the local partners understand what their governments are capable of doing and what they want to do. And when I leave and go back, there's follow up from local partners. Then they follow up and ask, you promised to do this on Uganda, have you done it? And then we also go to the politicians. So for the US, we go to Congress, and then we make sure that some members of the Congress are all constantly asking the questions. And then we go to other countries and ask for resolutions from their parliament. Because some of the governments can't ignore the resolutions. So it takes a lot of effort and a lot of advocacy. But again, to be listened to, you also need to carry the voice of the community. So we first build up the voice of the community in the country and make sure that everything I am saying is in sync with what the Ugandan LGBT community and civil society wants. And so for many governments, they feel better responding when they know they won't get backlash, when they know whatever they say is not going to affect the ordinary Ugandan or the ordinary actors on the ground. So it takes a lot of work and efforts, including, but most importantly, working with civil society partners and some LGBTQ activists, and not only LGBTQ activists, but even other activists working on other issues. Because we have so many activists who have worked on Uganda around the world.
Tim?
Just ask my same question.
Good.
Thank you for the presentation and for all the work. You mentioned the case in Massachusetts. Did you ever consider, or would you consider bringing a similar case in a country that has universal jurisdiction and a link could be established towards one of the exporters of homophobia who are active in Uganda?
We are researching on doing that at the moment. And what we want to do is, well, it could be universal, but also what we want to do is get more community that can come with us to do our case. Either where there's jurisdiction in their community. So for example, bring up our case, get some US partners. Or if we go to international courts, then get other parties in Africa, Eastern Europe and other countries. Then bring up our case against similar co-conspirators. So we're doing research on that now with some of the lawyers we've been working with and see if that is a possibility.
David?
Thanks, of course, for your presentation. You had mentioned, I think that you said there were 22 LGBTQ organizations in Uganda that were shut down after the law. So what has been the response of the rest of the civil society sector? We studied in one of my classes, the Africa Youth Initiative Network. That was, leader of that organization was here last semester. Have other actors, local actors, been supportive? Or are they intimidated? You know, what's been the response of other local actors in the civil society sector in Uganda?
It's been quite difficult to get support from civil society, and partly because they are afraid of what will happen to them. And besides the LGBT community, there's shrinking civic space in my country. Many NGOs have been shut down because of the work they do either on other human rights issues, political issues. The UN Human Rights Office has been shut down in my country, it's not there anymore. The biggest donor facility that was providing money to NGOs, and including funding some government work, was shut down as well because it was accused of funding opposition politicians. So civil society is under attack in the country. So for many of them, they see it as a big burden to take on the LGBTQ plus community. And unfortunately, for some of the human rights organizations, they actually are homophobic and transphobic. They believe the propaganda and conspiracy theories that is being spread by the anti-rights movement. Some of them are staying out there. We have some who have come to us and said, oh no, this law is about protecting children. and we can't work with you because we want to protect children. So it has been really, really difficult. We have a few who are standing with us and working with us. Some of the women's rights organizations are working with us, but it's been very difficult to get massive support from civil society.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for your address. I was just wondering, I guess more broadly, what you feel like, or what you see being the largest challenges to Uganda's like political landscape in the next 10 or 20 years.
Well, the biggest challenge is, first of all, it's the president we have is very old. And yes, and the fear is that there's no political system that allows for succession of any kind. You know, we have a multi-party system. We have elections every after 5 years that have been, you know, some observers say are flawed. So looking at the political landscape, the fear is politically the country, where is the country headed? The country is disarray. So we don't see a political future that is clear for many Ugandans. And that's worrying. And it's worrying mostly for human rights, because we could get a much worse authoritarian president, or we could get into civil war, or we could get into a political really instability. So we don't know, because it feels like the current president hasn't created that environment that allows succession, transition. So it's really disarray, I would say.
Yeah, I was thinking about African solidarity, and you were mentioning earlier in the presentation in the 1950s, the sodomization, criminalization, sodomization from the British kind of was introduced. So that made me think, and the question is, what do you see a difference in how Francophone Africa is navigating this issue versus Anglophone?
Yes, thank you. That's very important. Yes, a very, very big difference. Many of the Francophone countries don't criminalize homosexuality, and many of the Francophone countries are not coming up with anti-gay legislation, and partly because the people exporting the anti-gay laws can't speak French. So they can't, because it takes so much. If you go to Mugisha, there is a movie called God Loves Uganda. See, if you see what the missionaries are doing, they go into local communities and indoctrinate people. So they can't do that in French. It's very difficult. And so there is more acceptance in Francophone countries. And many Francophone countries, they're not even coming up with new laws. It's different. There's still society disapproval and hate crimes, but there are no laws at least. Yeah.
I just have two questions. One kind of, one more focused on your organization and like how you work, and one just as a kind of follow-up to what we just asked. So one, in terms of like the homophobic culture like, throughout, is it more, do you think that it's, I know that it's obviously both, but how do you see it in terms of if it leans more towards just like a cultural aversion fueled by religion and like the missionaries that we discussed with the evangelical Christians being involved, or do you see it more so focused on like, I know the things it's hard, but like the feeling aspect and other just cultural statements that tend to be present in both religious and non-religious like communities? That's it.
Yeah. I see it being more culture, and the reason is religion is part of our culture. now, so you can't separate the two. Though religion was introduced in Africa, it was never our religion, and our actual religion was demonized by the Christians. So now everything Christianity is culture. I'll give you an example. If you speak to, when I speak to many Ugandans, they tell me, oh, I never met a gay person before, so I've met you, and I'm no longer homophobic. But then they'll tell you, but my culture can't accept you. But then I'm like, explain the culture. And if they start any explanation, it goes back to religion. Like, but my church, and we're so prayerful. My parents go to church, so it always goes back to religion. So it's been, the indoctrination is almost ingrained into the culture and the religion, which has become part of our culture. The notion of children is new, and I believe that is something that eventually we will end. Because then we have young people who are going to start speaking up and either saying, you know, I'm gay, no one told me how to be gay. They will start coming about their family, coming about their friends, and then eventually every person will know a gay person. And the culture no, because their family will still frown upon them, either because they are religious or because they believe an African. If they say Africans shouldn't be gay, you know, you're African, why are you gay? You shouldn't be. Africans can't be gay. It's not so Western. Because it's more culture than it is around, you know, children. Yeah.
Thank you. And then my last question was, how did you manage to build such a relevant and impactful organization with like considerable strength and community, which in a broader sense is like quite homophobic? Like, how do you manage to like that?
I've been asked that question a lot. I think it's the resilience. It is the fact that we've been under attack so much that we've been able to build a strong community. And I can tie this into the question that I've been asked many times. In many communities, you find division where the trans community is separate, the lesbian community is separate, the gay community is separate. For Uganda, it's one community. At some point, we had the trans and lesbian community leading the movement because, again, we knew that if you as a gay man I'm going to speak, I'm going to be severely attacked. So the trans and lesbian community, we'll be the ones at the front line. So we've been one community, and we started building sexual minorities in Uganda when there wasn't so much presence of social media. So we relied on communal organizing. And I think we draw the strength from that. Because now someone can be at their home and at my home can be different places, but we can rally around the same cause. But that thing had to be physical, in the same space as a family. And people were coming with, you know, different backgrounds and telling us stories of discrimination we had never heard of, that we didn't even know existed. So it's that resilience that has made us build such a strong organization.
Monica?
Yeah, thank you again for your talk. I was wondering if you could say more about why you think that Uganda as a country was targeted by this form of recolonization through these missionizing efforts by these American evangelical Christians. Obviously, as someone else mentioned, like language probably figures in an important way in that making access easier to locate in Uganda. But also too, I mean, this idea of establishing conversion therapy centers. You know, this is a failed project in the United States. Most states have banned conversion therapy. And those who led conversion therapy organizations like Exodus International have since, you know, those leaders have come out on documentary saying that they know that with these conversion therapy programs did not end in the results that these people put themselves through. So I wonder maybe if you have some insight as to why of all of the, African nations that Uganda has been so targeted by this recolonization effort?
Yeah. So in the 1980s, Uganda was one of the first countries where HIV and AIDS was discovered. And so there was so much research being done, centered in the islands where HIV and AIDS was discovered. And end the stigma on HIV and AIDS, and to make sure that people listen and do a lot of work. Majority of the work was done with church leaders in the country. And so it reached a point, a moment, where the scientists started coming in and saying, if Uganda wants to keep its trajectory of progress, you need to start addressing the issue of homosexuality. And so many of the religious leaders became resistant to that. And I remember as a young boy, really young, my first positive information on homosexuality was in a teenage book that was on the streets. And the headline wasn't very good, it was the naked of homosexuals. But the content inside was very positive and informative for me as a young person. And I held on to that book for a very long time. So later on, everything that was addressing HIV and AIDS and talking about same-sex was banned. And on top of that, the church leaders also advocated for the banning of the use of condoms, because we had a program called ABC. And so they said, no, remove the C. The C is promoting promiscuity. You should only say abstain and be faithful. So now the conversation started shifting to saying we cannot accept anything on homosexuality in our HIV and AIDS programs. And some of the scientists, Ugandan scientists, were saying, no, I think we should listen to global science that is saying for us to keep our trajectory, we should include everyone. And so in the early 2000s, our national strategic plan for the Ministry of Health included men who have sex with men who were not visible at all. No LGBTQ person was visible. And the churches came and fought that, and it was removed. And when it was removed, that is when different civil society organizations started reaching out to the community and saying, you need to stand up and start fighting because you're being erased before you even know, before you get any visibility. And so the church groups were inviting their partners from abroad who were running so many projects. There was I'm forgetting the name of the religious leader who was doing a lot of work in Uganda and Rwanda, who had a project supporting a lot of projects on HIV and AIDS and was out campaigning against homosexuality. And so that is how the target really came up, because of the work we were doing, the good work we were doing on HIV and AIDS, and because the country was being told to follow science and include men who have sex with men.
Alex?
In your view, is the introduction of basic social legislation, is that the ends or the means, right?
Pardon? I didn't hear.
Well, I guess I'm asking, do you see the introduction of homophobic legislation in Uganda and other places? Is it a political end or a political mean? Are we, it's so easy to accuse somebody of being homosexual and then, prosecute them because it's basically it's invisible, right? So, for example, in Russia, they passed anti-LGBTQ legislation, but it's used as political means to basically say, right, you're homosexual, therefore you go to prison. But really, what you're doing, you're just targeting folks you disagree with. Right? So, do you think there's an element of that, or is it actually the true intention to, punish homosexuality as phenomenon?
Yeah, so it's two-way. For the people who introduced the legislations, they want to punish LGBTQ person. Because for Uganda, unlike in many other countries, it's very systematic. like I mentioned, before the law was introduced, there was a whole campaign running on social media targeting myself and other activists and my organization. And that's how my organization got shut down. And these campaigns are paid for. They are influencers on social media running misinformation and disinformation. And so there are individuals. One of them was recently denied a visa for coming to the US because the last time she came at the UN meeting in New York, she was actually spreading homophobia and hate speech here, meeting her friends. So they have partnerships. They work with other partners in the US and Russia as well, and they are well funded in Uganda to do that. But then the politicians take advantage of that. So the politicians, they use anti-gay legislation, anti-gay rhetoric to divert attention from the public. So last week, my government, the Ugandan police wanted me arrested. But that stemmed from Ugandans had a social media hashtag on Twitter where they were exposing corruption for public officials. And the person who was named most as corrupt was the Speaker of the House, who is the Speaker of the Parliament of Uganda. And she went in the Parliament when she was being asked questions. She said, no, I'm going to answer any questions. These are homosexuals. Don't ask them homosexual questions. She even used the very, very extreme language in the House of Parliament. And then, when she started talking about homosexuality, every Ugandan forgot about the corruption and focused on homosexuality. Same thing, every time an anti-gay legislation is brought up in Uganda, they are covering up something. When this law was first introduced, there was massive corruption and theft of relief aid that was made for a region in Uganda, in northern Uganda, that is really under so much poverty. And so when that was out in the public, they brought the anti-gay legislation, and every Ugandan forgot about the corruption and went after it. So they supplement each other. There are people who extremely want to punish LGBTQ persons or erase the existence of LGBTQ persons, and the politicians are happy. Every politician right now in Uganda is talking about homosexuality negatively. And they're also using this against their own opponents. So the biggest opposition leader is being called a homosexual. This is someone who does not even support LGBTQ human rights. His son is called gay, he's called gay, everyone is saying he's gay. And they're saying, we are the ones giving him money to run his campaigns. In fact, during the last elections, I had to move into a safe house, that is a non-disclosed location, because every person was getting arrested saying, we are funding this opposition. My lawyer was arrested and put in prison and tortured, and he had to leave the country after that. Because they were saying, because he's the one taking the money to the opposition. Yeah.
Frank, this is sort of related to what you were just talking about. Is there a way to combat this with sort of taking to the courts cases, say, as you just said, of corruption? Or is there like good documentation, like in other countries, of child sexual abuse by the church of Ugandan children? Like, is there a way to sort of, to the point of young people, like sort of shift the focus on whether it has actually been child sexual abuse and sort of, you know, redirect attention away from using gay people as a scapegoat?
I mean, that would be a very, very good strategy. And we've raised that many times. We've even offered to support empirical data that shows the abuse of children, the abuse of young girls by heterosexual men. Our police release reports every month of young girls who are being abused by heterosexual men. And, you know, members of parliament and government says nothing. The day the president saying the anti-gay legislation, that's very day he pardoned about 10 pedophiles from prison, and what kind of message are you sending? So I think for civil society and for many of our partners, that would be a very good strategy to do that. But we've also advocated if Uganda wants to protect children, they should bring up a law that protects children, both male and female, from heterosexuals and homosexuals who violate young children.
I have two questions. First is, in a moment before we close, could you talk about SMUG in its current form? I know it has been shut down, but obviously it still exists. So if you could talk a little bit about that. But the first question is there a generational difference at all? In other words, if you talk to university students in Uganda, if you talk to the teenagers in their 20s who are very much on social media and attuned to Western social media, is there more tolerance in that age group than the parents and the grandparents and the politicians?
Okay. So about sexual minorities in Uganda. So first of all, we are an ideology and not an organization. So when we were shut down, the government shut down land. We never existed in the first place. and surprisingly, there was a whole press conference shut up. And they called me and gave me the letter. And I'm like, what are you shutting down? So, and ironically, in 2012, we went to register as a non-for-profit and we were denied registration. We were told you can't register because your name is undesirable because of the work you're doing promoting homosexuality in this country. We said, okay. So we went to court and sued the registrar and we lost the case. And we went back again and we lost the case. And we went back again and we lost the case. And we were back again. We're still suing. So it's and so when we were shut down, we're like, what are you shutting down? In fact, I saw one of the people who worked in the government, the body that's responsible for shutting us down, said they are in court suing the government for being denied to register. They never exist. So we never existed. We've always been an underground organization. And the reason I still call myself the executive director of sexual minorities in Uganda is for resilience. Because when I show up everywhere, I'm like, I'm the ED of SMAG. So like, what's SMAG? I'm like, it is sexual minorities in Uganda. And then under our constitution, you cannot shut down an ideology. We are like a pressure group. Pressure groups are allowed to exist. We are not registered anywhere. And then in terms of how structure, we have a non for I don't know how to say 501c3 in the US.
Okay.
That,
so that's the
one.
that we saw.
Yes, that's the one. So it receives our funding and supports our work. But in Uganda, we don't have any legal, we've never been legal in Uganda. And there are moments when the situation wasn't so bad and we were encouraged to register as maybe a youth organization or HIV and AIDS organization, and we said no, because then we'll still get arrested for disguising or for being what we are not. But it would also never support our advocacy. We want to be registered and accepted as an LGBTQ organization. Yeah.
Now about the generational change.
Oh, the generational
Are teenagers and 20-something and college-educated Ugandans of a different mindset or not?
Some extent, yes. Young people, thanks to American pop culture, many young people are exposed to Western media. And I've said it many times, if I had Rihanna and Beyonce going to Uganda and saying, accept homosexuality, we'll have many young people saying, okay, if Beyonce says so, I love quality people. So, pop culture has a huge influence. Also, Ugandans really love footballers from the Premier League. So they support all these games. So if you had such celebrities, they would listen. And the young people, there's acceptance at that level, at most at the individual level. But unfortunately, we still are in a culture where young people are voiceless. If an adult says something, you can't speak back as an African. So they still are indoctrinated by that kind of setting, whereby if my father doesn't accept homosexuality, I can't accept homosexuality. And unfortunately for universities, there has been so much indoctrination that it is the most dangerous place to be gay at this point. Because if you come out or if you're not, you get lynched by the students. There's no acceptance at all. But within, I find it more on a one-on-one. So for like me, people who know me, most of them are more accepting because they know me, I talk to them. And some people, there's a lot of ignorance. Some people believe if you come if you come out to them, either you want to turn them gay or you've been exposed to Western ideologies, or you're not, you cease being Ugandan, you've been exposed to bad behavior, like they call it, bad morals, like they call it in Uganda. So there's that fear. And so the aggression comes from there. And unfortunately, many young people are aggressive that way.
One last question, and then well,
thank you, Frank, for your presentation. I wanted to ask, a lot of the abuses, so the kind of timing that you say, one is raising public awareness all over the world. And the second is security forces abusing, carrying out the abuses, basically government agents. And we're here in New York, and the US government is one of the biggest funders of the Ugandan government and also trains Uganda's military, funds them and everything. Do you think it would help to raise awareness in America about US government's involvement with the Ugandan government to, as a way also to put pressure on the Ugandan government to stop the abuses?
Yeah, thank you. I think someone asked a question and I was supposed to tie into that. Yeah, it's very important to raise that with this government and tie in other human rights violations that are happening. And that would actually resonate very well with many Ugandans, because many times Ugandans have come, and surprisingly, we are the group that's most under attack from security forces, government, legislation, and Ugandans. And when we get international support, then all the other groups, human rights groups, political groups, they say, oh, the international community only cares about homosexuality. They never speak up about other things. So now we encourage governments like the US government to speak up about general human rights situation in Uganda. And when the US responded to the anti-gay legislation and issued travel visa bans, they did not ban Ugandans who were homophobic. They put visa bans on Ugandans who were homophobic, who had abused public office, either fraud, corruption, and who were also abusing other human rights, violating other human rights of other people. So that was very helpful. And then finally, is that the US, again, and it's not the US only, it's been very difficult for us to advocate and get support, because again, countries look at Uganda as a country that provides regional security. So you find that the budgets and the financial support going to Uganda for security forces are higher than humanitarian aid, because they look at Uganda as a country that provides regional security, Southern Sudan and Somalia and other places.
Please join me in thanking Frank Mugisha. All right, so for the panelists, There is a shuttle outside that is going to be leaving in 10 minutes at 6:45 to come back to downtown Binghamton. It's just outside and to the right by academic A is the building. We're going to leave the right. It's way right up there.